The wind howled across the prairie, carrying with it the sharp scent of smoke and the faint metallic temps of the river nearby. Shadows of twisted oaks stretched across the rough dirt road, their branches clawing at the night sky as if warning anyone who dared pass through. The woman stood at the edge of the small wooden cabin, her hands pressed protectively against her belly. She felt the life inside her stir, and with it, an unshakable resolve. "I won't give him up," she whispered to the cold night, her voice trembling yet firm, echoing across the empty land. Behind her, the fire from the hearth inside painted the walls with flickering gold and red, as if the room itself were alive with tension. Her eyes scanned the horizon, alert for any sign of movement, any shadow that might signal danger. The world she lived in was harsh, unforgiving. Men with guns and lawless intentions roamed freely, and a single wrong step could cost a life in a heartbeat. But she had learned early that fear would never protect her child. Every evening she faced the encroaching night with the same determination, knowing that the choices she made now would define more than just her own survival. The weight of expectation pressed against her chest, heavy and relentless, yet she refused to let it bend her spirit. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with tension. Her husband, a man hardened by years of chasing cattle across unforgiving land, leaned against the doorway, his face shadowed and unreadable. He had never been a man to offer easy comfort, but his eyes softened slightly when he glanced at her. There was understanding there, the kind that comes from shared hardship and the unspoken acknowledgement that some battles are fought silently. "You're sure about this?" he asked quietly, his voice rough but steady. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she let her gaze wander over the worn floorboards, imagining the life they had tried to carve out here, the fragile safety of their little home against the vastness of the wilderness. The firelight danced across the room, casting long shadows that seemed to twist and writhe like spirits in the night. The whispers that always followed a woman who dared make her own decisions, and the danger lurking just beyond the tree line. Men who had no patience for compassion or morality, who believed that power and fear were the only truths worth acknowledging, but she refused to be cowed. Each decision she made, each risk she took, was for the child she carried. Every step was a declaration. This life mattered, and she would defend it with every ounce of her strength. Outside, the prairie seemed endless, a dark sea of grass that moved with the wind as though alive. The moon rose slowly, silvering the world in a pale, unyielding light. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, and she shivered not from cold, but from the instinctive knowledge that life here was never certain. The man beside her watched quietly, his hand brushing against the brim of his hat, the muscles in his jaw tightening as if bracing for a storm that he knew was coming. The night was heavy with promises, unkept, and threats unspoken, a dangerous silence that only heightened her resolve. She thought of the choices that had brought her here, the narrow paths she had walked, with nothing but grit and hope as companions. The letters from home, the threats from strangers, the fleeting kindness of friends who had vanished when danger approached, all of it was a reminder that the world was not kind, that every day was a fight for survival. And yet, beneath the fear, there was a burning fire, a refusal to surrender. "Don't give him up," she said again, louder this time, letting the words carry across the prairie. The night seemed to listen, and the fire inside her glowed brighter, defying the cold shadows that pressed in from every side. A sudden noise cut through the quiet, the snapping of a branch somewhere in the darkness beyond the cabin. She stiffened, heart pounding, and the man beside her moved instinctively, hand resting on the worn handle of his revolver. The tension in the air was palpable, a living thing that pressed down on them, daring them to falter. She gripped her stomach, feeling the life within her respond to the fear and anticipation that surged through her veins. This was not a night for hesitation, not a night for doubts. Every instinct screamed that the world outside the firelight was full of threats, yet she refused to step back. Every instinct also screamed that this child deserved protection, that some sacrifices could not be made, and that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. From somewhere on the horizon, the distant glow of another fire flickered, a reminder that they were not alone. Whether it was friend or foe, she could not tell, but the knowledge that someone watched unsettled her. The man beside her shifted, and for the first time, she sensed the weight of shared responsibility. A bond forged not in words, but in the understanding that the night was unforgiving. and that survival required more than strength. It required vigilance, strategy, and an unwavering heart. The cabin itself seemed to hold its breath, the creaking floorboards and the faint rustle of the wind, creating a rhythm that mirrored the racing beat of her heart. She glanced at the small bundle of blankets folded neatly in the corner, reminder of the fragile life that depended entirely on her decisions tonight. The flickering firelight reflected in her eyes, giving her features an almost otherworldly intensity. This was a moment suspended in time, a crossroads between fear and courage, danger and safety, surrender and defiance. Her thoughts turned briefly to the future, to the world she hoped to shape for her child. A world where courage was respected, where justice could be found even in a land that often seemed to worship only power and ruthlessness. She knew the road ahead would be treacherous, lined with men who would exploit weakness and mock hope, but she had chosen her path, and there was no turning back. Her gaze hardened, and she felt a surge of determination wash over her. She would not give up what mattered most, no matter the cost. Suddenly a shout echoed from the edge of the prairie, raw and urgent, slicing through the night like a knife. The fire flickered violently as if responding to the tension, and the wind seemed to carry the voice directly to her ears. She turned sharply toward the sound, body taut and ready, every nerve alert. The man beside her drew his revolver fully now, his eyes scanning the darkness, waiting for a threat that seemed both imminent and invisible. The night, which had been oppressive yet still, now felt alive with anticipation, with the promise of confrontation. She gripped the wooden railing of the porch, her knuckles white, and whispered once more, almost as if chanting to keep fear at bay, "I won't give him up." The words carried more weight now, a defiance that challenged whatever forces stirred in the shadows. The wind picked up again, rustling through the tall grass, and she felt the first heavy drops of rain hit her face. Cold and urgent, as though the storm itself had decided to join in the night's tension. Somewhere out there, in the darkness beyond the firelight, something was waiting, something that would test her resolve, her courage, and the very limits of what she could endure. And then, just as the storm began to howl with full force, the figure appeared on the horizon, silhouette against the lightning-split sky, moving closer with intent that was impossible to ignore. She felt her heart skip a beat, every instinct screaming danger, yet there was no time to hesitate. The fire inside her, fierce and unyielding, pushed her forward, urging her to meet whatever came with eyes wide open, with a spirit unbroken. She clutched her belly, steadying herself, knowing that this night, this moment, would change everything. The figure stopped just at the edge of the firelight, and the rain fell harder, drenching them both in an instant. There was a pause, a silent understanding that the night held no promises, only challenges, only choices. And in that silence the woman made her decision, her voice cutting through the storm as she whispered, almost to herself, almost to the child she carried, "I won't give him up." The night seemed to respond, lightning flashing across the sky, thunder rolling like a drumbeat of fate, and in that instant the world hung in balance. One step forward, one wrong move, and everything could be lost. Yet she felt no fear now, only the fierce determination of a mother who would not yield. Whatever came, whatever forces had converged upon her, she would face it head on. And with that, the figure shifted, revealing a face obscured by shadow, and the night held its breath, waiting for the story to unfold. The fire blazed, the rain poured, and the prairie waited silently, a witness to the beginning of a tale that would test courage, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and the life she had vowed to protect. The night burned with her decision. The world beyond the cabin had no choice but to take notice. The figure remained in the rain-soaked darkness, motionless, as if studying them as much as they studied it. The storm seemed to exaggerate every movement, every flicker of light from the cabin's fire. She could barely make out the outline of a wide-brimmed hat and a long coat clinging to the man's frame, sodden with rain. Her pulse raced, not from fear alone, but from the curiosity that threaded through her caution. There was something familiar, or at least recognizable, in the way he carried himself, a confidence that spoke of a life hardened by hardship and experience. She turned to the man beside her, who lowered his revolver only slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Who is that?" he asked, voice tense, though not entirely surprised. She shook her head, unwilling to admit that she had no idea that the sudden appearance had stirred more questions than answers. The prairie had its share of strangers, wanderers, drifters, or men looking to take what didn't belong to them, but there was an air about this one that suggested a purpose beyond idle wandering. Lightning split the sky again, revealing more detail for a brief instant. The figure's coat was torn at the edges, as if it had seen long days on the trail, and his boots carried the mud and grit of distant roads. He lifted a hand, gesturing faintly toward the cabin, and for a moment the rain seemed to fall harder between them, as if nature itself wanted to separate the worlds of inside and out. She felt the weight of the moment settle around her shoulders, the kind of weight that told her decisions made in the dark would ripple into days and months ahead. The man beside her finally spoke again. "We can't just stand here," he said, his voice low but firm. "Storm or no storm, he's not leaving without us noticing. That's no ordinary traveler." She nodded, though the truth was, her mind was spinning. She wanted to question him, to demand answers, but the way he held himself, the quiet intensity in his stance, made her realize that any confrontation now would be reckless. Not reckless for fear alone, but reckless for what she carried inside her. As the figure stepped closer, memory pressed unbidden into her mind, a story her mother had whispered when she was a child, about travelers who arrived on stormy nights bringing both danger and opportunity. Those travelers often carried secrets, she had said, secrets that could change the course of a family, a town, or a life. She shivered despite the fire behind her, feeling the hairs on her arms rise. Somehow she knew the story wasn't just folklore, it was a warning disguised as a tale. And now, standing on the threshold of her cabin, she felt its truth in the rain-soaked air. The man inside the cabin shifted again, brushing his hand across the back of his neck. He had been quiet for so long that she sometimes wondered if he calculated everything before speaking. She could see that calculation in his eyes now. "You need to bring him in," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. "We need to know what we're dealing with before this night gets worse." He nodded slowly, stepping forward, and the figure outside responded, taking another careful step into the circle of firelight. When he finally reached the cabin's porch, she noticed a small, weathered badge pinned to his coat, barely visible beneath the layers of soaked fabric. Her breath caught. Lawmen in these parts were rare, and rarer still were those who did not carry a reputation for ruthlessness alongside their authority. The badge was a promise of some order in a world that had little, yet it also hinted at danger. This man was not here by accident, and the night had suddenly grown heavier with implications. Her gaze dropped to the ground, imagining the path that had brought him here. Was he tracking someone, or had fate, the unpredictable master of all things, guided him directly to her door? Either way, the answer would not come easily, and she knew instinctively that questions would have to wait. The life she carried demanded caution. The life she carried demanded control over what she could and could not risk. Inside the cabin, the fire flickered against walls lined with shelves of worn books, old tools and trinkets left behind by those who had passed through long before. Each object carried a story, a fragment of history that made her feel grounded even as the storm raged outside. Yet even among these relics, the tension pressed in, heavy and suffocating. The man beside her glanced at the door, then back to her, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Both understood that this night would test their endurance, their resolve, and their ability to act decisively. The stranger finally spoke, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. "I don't mean to startle you," he said, the rain dripping from the brim of his hat, "but there are things happening in these parts. Things that could threaten more than just your cabin tonight." She stiffened, realizing that the words were deliberately vague, crafted to unsettle and inform at once. Her mind raced, filling in possibilities men with grudges, old rivalries, hidden dangers she had yet to encounter. Every option seemed to carry risk. He stepped closer, raising one gloved hand as if to show he meant no harm. "I've been following tracks for days, looking for signs. And I think your life, your family, may be part of something much larger than you realize." The firelight reflected off the wet surface of his coat, casting him in a shifting, almost ghostly glow. She swallowed, feeling the tension tighten in her chest. Part of her wanted to retreat, to hide behind the cabin walls, and pretend the storm, the stranger, and the night itself did not exist. But she could not. Not when the life she carried depended on vigilance, on courage, on seeing danger before it found her. Lightning struck again, closer this time, and the thunder rolled like a drum across the plains. The woman's mind flashed back to the earlier days, when she had first arrived at this cabin with nothing but hope and determination. She remembered the harsh winters, the long days spent tending the small garden outside, the nights filled with silence so deep it felt alive. She remembered learning to read the land, to sense danger before it arrived, to trust instincts over assurances. Every lesson, every memory, brought her here, to this moment. With a single unwavering thought, she would not give up what mattered most. The man inside the cabin finally spoke again. "We should hear him out," he said, his voice steady. "This storm, this night, it's too precise for coincidence. Something's coming, and I've learned that ignoring it rarely ends well." She nodded, feeling a mixture of fear and relief. There was a chance, however small, that the stranger's presence might offer protection, insight, or at least a temporary alliance. But the risks were undeniable. Every step outside the door, every word exchanged, could tip the balance between survival and disaster. The stranger's eyes met hers, and in them she saw a flicker of recognition. Either he saw the determination that drove her, or he recognized the danger that surrounded her and understood the stakes. He spoke again, softer this time, almost confiding. "The nights are longer now. The danger's more cunning. What you're protecting, it will make you a target. But I can help. If you let me." She felt her stomach tighten, a mixture of instinctive distrust and cautious hope. The offer hung in the storm-soaked air like a fragile lifeline, one that could just as easily lead to safety or ruin. The rain fell harder, drumming against the roof and windows, masking the quiet shuffling of movement outside the firelight. Somewhere beyond the cabin, the prairie seemed alive with shadows, each gust of wind carrying whispers of unknown intentions. She glanced at the man beside her, whose jaw was tight, eyes sharp, calculating the next move. He did not speak, but she understood his silence. The path ahead required thought as much as courage. Decisions made in haste could cost more than comfort, they could cost life itself. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the warmth of her body and the promise of life within. The stranger's presence, the storm, the uncertainty, they all combined into a tension so palpable it was nearly a living thing. And yet, beneath the fear, there was determination, fierce and unyielding. The night had not revealed its full story, not yet. But the first threads of a dangerous tale were being woven right before her eyes. The stranger took another cautious step, and a low rumble of thunder seemed to echo the motion. "There are people, men who would stop at nothing," he said quietly, "and they know more than we do. They are coming whether we like it or not." The woman's heart pounded. She felt the weight of her decision pressing even harder against her chest. One wrong move could expose them. One misstep could turn the night into a fight for survival, one she could not afford to lose. And yet, even as the storm raged and the mystery deepened, she felt the fire within her grow stronger. This night, this stranger, the dangers lurking just beyond the firelight, they all meant one thing. She had to protect the life she carried. No matter the cost, no matter the questions left unanswered. She would face whatever came, with courage, with cunning, and with a resolve that would not bend. The night had begun its test, and she would meet it head-on, even as the rain and shadows conspired to keep the answers just out of reach. The rain slowed to a steady drizzle, but the storm's anger lingered in the air, leaving the prairie slick and heavy with tension. The figure on the porch did not move, yet his presence filled the space with a quiet command. She could feel it in her bones, the understanding that the night was no longer just a passing storm, that it carried with it threats unseen and choices that could alter everything. She shifted slightly, careful not to reveal too much, careful to protect both the life she carried and the fragile sense of safety she had fought to build. Inside, the man beside her finally broke the silence. "We can't ignore what he's saying," he murmured, eyes still scanning the horizon beyond the firelight. His voice was calm, but the tension in his posture spoke volumes. She nodded, knowing he was right. Their isolation, once a shield, had become a vulnerability. The prairie offered little cover for the unprepared. And tonight, something or someone was hunting more than just shadows. The stranger tilted his hat back slightly, letting the firelight illuminate the sharp lines of his face. "There are groups moving through this territory," he said carefully. "Men who follow rumors. Men who think fear gives them power. They've heard whispers about this land, about who's passing through. They don't take kindly to strangers interfering. His words sent a chill through her, though she would not show it. She pressed a hand to her belly instinctively, as if to reinforce the promise she had made. The child she carried had already become her compass, her reason to measure every danger and every choice with precision. The rain eased further, leaving the smell of wet earth and firewood mingling in the cool night air. Somewhere, a horse neighed, distant but close enough to make her flinch. Movement beyond the trees shifted her attention, and she caught the glint of metal just long enough to make her heart hammer. The stranger noticed it too, his hand brushing near the revolver at his hip, though he did not draw it. He was measuring, assessing, waiting to see whether this was the approach of danger or the consequence of her own restless imagination. Inside the cabin, the man beside her exhaled slowly. "We can't fight them all," he said softly. "But maybe we don't have to. Maybe it's about being smarter, using what we know of this land. This prairie has ways of hiding you if you understand it." She listened, realizing he was reminding both of them that survival had always been a matter of wit and patience, not just strength. And now, more than ever, those lessons mattered. Every tree, every rise in the terrain, every shadow in the firelight had a story, a warning, a hint about what might come. The stranger spoke again, leaning slightly closer, rain still dripping from his hat. "I've been tracking one of these men for days," he said. "He's careful, but predictable. He moves in patterns, leaving traces for someone who knows what to look for. And right now, he's heading this way. You should know that the moment he sees who's inside this cabin, nothing will stop him from taking what he wants." The words hit like cold steel, and she pressed her lips together, feeling the life inside her respond with a quiet kick, a reminder that surrender was not an option. For the first time, she considered the past, the choices that had led her here. She remembered the wagon that had broken down near the river, the kind stranger who had offered her water and shelter, and the long, lonely nights when she had whispered to the unborn child, promising protection, promising life. Remembered the townsfolk who had frowned at her independence, warning her of danger, and the ones who had vanished without a trace, swallowed by the prairie or by the very men who now seemed to circle closer with intent. Every memory sharpened the focus in her mind, each one a warning and a guide. The man beside her moved closer to the door, peering into the darkness. "They won't give up," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Not until they know who you are and what you carry. And they'll come with more than words if they have to." She felt a shiver of fear, the kind that had haunted her during the long winters and dry, endless summers. But it was fear mixed with resolve, the kind that came from knowing that every moment she hesitated, the stakes grew higher. Outside, the prairie seemed to shift under the moonlight, shadows moving where there should be none. She saw the glint of another metal edge, perhaps another weapon, hidden but purposeful. The stranger's eyes followed her gaze. "They're organized," he said, "and they work in teams. If one of them spots weakness, the rest will exploit it." "You have to be ready for anything," she nodded, realizing the weight of the warning. Their isolation, once a blessing, was now a potential trap. Every shadow, every whisper of wind, every flicker of movement could be the approach of someone who did not intend to negotiate. The cabin itself seemed to respond to the tension, the fire flaring up as if it understood the gravity of the night. She glanced around at the familiar objects, the books, the tools, the small wooden toys she had started crafting for the child, and felt a surge of determination. This home, this life might be fragile, but it was worth every risk. She would protect it, no matter what strategies, alliances, or courage it required. The stranger moved to the side, gesturing to the man beside her. "If we're going to survive this, we need to plan," he said. "We can't wait for them to make the first move. Knowledge is our advantage. And right now, what you know about the land and the hours of the night could save all of us." She listened, absorbing every word, weighing the possibilities. She understood that the night was not just about survival, it was about foresight, about anticipating danger, about making choices that would shape the lives of everyone in that cabin. A sudden noise, low and deliberate, came from beyond the trees, a single footstep. Careful, but deliberate. She froze, feeling the tension coiling in her chest. The stranger's hand went to the revolver, but he did not draw. Instead, he tilted his head, listening, calculating, reading the movement like a map of threats and opportunities. The man beside her mirrored the motion, ready for confrontation but restrained by thought. She felt the pulse of anticipation in her veins, the life inside her moving as though sensing the danger just as keenly. For a moment, the night seemed to hold its breath. Trees swayed under the breeze, the fire flickered, and the rain whispered against the cabin roof. Every sound was amplified, every shadow more sinister. She felt the weight of the choice she had made, the promise she had whispered into the storm. "I won't give him up." Those words were no longer just a vow. They were a shield, a declaration, a challenge to the world. The stranger's voice broke the silence. "We'll need to create traps, barriers, something to slow them down if they approach. They won't stop. Not until they understand the cost of this night. And we have to be ready to move at a moment's notice." She nodded, the fire of determination matching the storm outside. They began moving quietly through the cabin, placing objects, blocking windows, checking doors, creating a fragile network of defenses that might buy them time. As they worked, her mind drifted to the unknown forces beyond the firelight. Who were these men? What did they want? And how much did they already know about the life she carried, the secrets she had kept, and the choices she had made? Every question sharpened the tension, threading suspense into every glance at the horizon. Every ear tuned to the prairie, every heartbeat synchronized with the pulse of a night that was far from over. Hours seemed to stretch in the dim light of the cabin, each one weighted with possibility and danger. She caught herself imagining scenarios, some terrifying, some barely plausible, all of them demanding vigilance. The man beside her remained silent, focused, his hands steady, but ready, his eyes scanning for anything that might hint at the approach of their unknown adversaries. The stranger moved with the precision of someone accustomed to danger, his presence both unsettling and reassuring, a constant reminder that survival required unity and careful thought. Then, from the corner of the cabin, she heard a soft scratching, faint but deliberate. Every nerve in her body tensed. Was it the wind, an animal, or something else entirely? The stranger's eyes met hers, sharp and questioning. "Stay calm," he said, but even as he spoke, the unease in his posture betrayed him. She realized that tonight, no sound could be ignored, no shadow dismissed. The prairie, the storm, the unknown forces circling, they had turned the world into a living, breathing puzzle of threats and opportunity. She felt the life inside her stir again, a quiet kick that reminded her of what was truly at stake. Every choice, every movement, every whispered plan was now part of a larger struggle, one she had no intention of surrendering. She could hear her own breath, the rhythm of the fire, the faint creak of the cabin, as if the very walls were holding tension alongside them. And in that moment, she understood that the night had only just begun to test her, that every shadow carried the promise of confrontation, and that the path ahead was still shrouded in mystery, danger, and the relentless pull of fate. The stranger stepped closer to the window, peering into the darkness. "They're close," he murmured. The words were a warning, a confirmation of what she already suspected. She pressed a hand to her belly, feeling the child shift once more, and knew with certainty that the promise she had made would not be broken. The fire flared, the rain whispered against the roof, and the prairie waited in silence, as if holding its breath for the next move in a night that had no end in sight. The night had grown darker, the storm now a distant memory, leaving only the chill of wet earth and the whisper of wind through the prairie. Every shadow beyond the cabin seemed alive, stretching closer, testing the fragile line of safety they had built. She pressed her back against the wall, one hand resting protectively on her belly, the other clutching the worn edge of the doorframe. Every muscle in her body was taut, every nerve alert, waiting for the first sign of movement that would signal the beginning of the confrontation she had feared for days. The stranger moved silently through the cabin, checking each window, each corner, the weight of his presence pressing down with the authority of someone accustomed to danger. "They're circling," he said quietly, his voice steady but urgent. "It won't be long before they try something, and when they do, you need to be ready." She nodded, swallowing the lump of fear rising in her throat. She had faced harsh winters, long rides through dry plains, and men who had threatened her life. But this was different. This was strategy, intelligence, and relentless intent focused entirely on her and what she carried. The man beside her moved toward the back door, listening. "We don't know what they want," he murmured, almost to himself. "But we do know they won't stop until they get it. If we make a mistake, if we hesitate, it could all be over in a moment." She felt the life inside her respond to his words, a kick that reminded her she had no choice but to fight, to protect, to survive. Every lesson she had learned in the harsh lands, every instinct honed by months alone and nights spent waiting, was ready to be tested in the coming hours. Outside, the prairie lay silent, but for the faint rustle of grass and the distant cry of a lone coyote. The shadows seemed to shift subtly, as if the night itself was preparing for what was to come. She watched the darkness, straining to catch any movement, any hint of the men the stranger had mentioned. Every second stretched longer than the last, each heartbeat amplified in the tense silence. Her palms were damp, not from sweat, but from the cold and the tension that wrapped around them like a living thing. The stranger's voice cut through the quiet. "There's more than one," he said, pointing toward a faint dark line that moved along the edge of the tree line. "At least 3. They've been watching, waiting for the right moment, and I think they know about you." Her chest tightened, a rush of fear and adrenaline mixing in a way that left her breathless. She pressed herself tighter against the wall, listening to the distant footfalls, imagining the men moving closer, calculating their approach, preparing to strike. The man beside her exhaled, a slow, measured release. "We have to split their attention," he said, eyes narrowing. "One of us stays here, keeps them focused. The other, we move quietly outside, flank them. If we can surprise them, we might gain the advantage, even if it's brief." She understood immediately that he was proposing risk, a gamble that could either buy them precious time or seal their fate. Hush. She swallowed, gripping the edge of the doorframe, feeling the life inside her stir in a way that mirrored the tension around them. Every creak of the cabin, every whisper of wind, every rustle beyond the firelight became a signal, a warning. She could no longer think in calm, measured moments. The night had condensed all the uncertainty, all the danger, into sharp edges that cut through her awareness. And yet, amid the fear, there was clarity. The promise she had whispered in the storm, "I won't give him up," was no longer just words. It was a plan, a shield, a reason to act decisively when the first move came. A sudden sound, louder this time, made her flinch, a twig snapping under deliberate weight. The stranger's head snapped toward it, eyes sharp. He motioned toward the back, and without speaking, the man beside her moved into position. Her heart hammered in her chest, the life inside her shifting with instinctive awareness. Every moment, every breath, felt like a countdown, a build-up to something inevitable. The men outside were closing in, and nothing could delay the clash that was about to erupt. She stepped closer to the firelight, hoping the glow would keep her visible just enough to watch the approach. Shadows moved along the edge of the tree line, figures dark and unyielding, glinting faintly in the moonlight. She could see their intent, the way they moved with careful precision, trained to strike, to intimidate, to take, hands tightened around the edge of the cabin wall. The warmth of the fire seemed insignificant against the cold weight of anticipation pressing down on her. The stranger whispered instructions, his voice low, controlled. "Stay calm. Don't make noise. Move only if I signal." They are watching, listening, feeling for weakness. "If they think we hesitate, they'll act." She nodded, her eyes scanning the horizon, following the shadows. Feeling the tension coil tighter around her heart with every passing second. This was no longer a warning. It was an inevitable confrontation. One that would test every ounce of courage, every ounce of cunning she possessed. Footsteps approached closer, deliberate, almost taunting. She could see the faint glint of metal, the shape of rifles held low but ready. Her pulse quickened. She pressed herself back against the wall, heart hammering, the firelight dancing over her face. The man beside her adjusted his stance, ready to act at a moment's notice. The stranger's gaze moved between them, calculating, silent, the tension in his shoulders betraying the knowledge that this moment could determine everything. A shadow appeared at the edge of the porch, pausing, scanning. She felt a chill run through her, imagining what would happen if they made the wrong move. The night seemed to hold its breath with her, every sound amplified, every shift in shadow a warning. She pressed a hand over her belly instinctively, feeling the child respond to the tension in a way that made her shiver. This was no longer a fight for her own life. It was a battle for the life she had promised to protect, a promise that would not be broken. The stranger moved slightly, gesturing toward a small opening in the tree line. "They'll try to divide us," he said quietly, eyes scanning the horizon. "We can't let them. If they split our attention, even for a moment, it could be fatal." She nodded, realizing the truth in his words. Every move, every breath, every glance mattered. The night had become a game of strategy, patience, and courage, where a single mistake could change everything in an instant. Footsteps grew closer, the shadow of one man moving along the porch railing. Another near the corner of the cabin, rifles glinting. She felt her muscles tighten, every nerve alert. The stranger motioned subtly to the man beside her, and they both shifted position, creating a delicate balance of visibility and concealment. She held her breath, feeling the rhythm of her heartbeat synchronize with the tension in the air, each second stretching longer, the anticipation almost unbearable. Then, from the edge of the trees, a voice called out, low and deliberate. It carried over the prairie, faint but unmistakable. A warning, a threat, a claim. "Come out," it said. "We know what's in there. We know who you are. Don't waste time hiding." She felt a shiver run through her, the life inside her responding to the urgency, the danger, the raw intent behind the words. She pressed herself against the wall tighter, realizing that the moment of confrontation had arrived. The stranger whispered again, calm but firm. "Not yet. Wait for my signal. They want a reaction. We won't give it to them." She nodded, feeling the weight of discipline, of patience, and the understanding that control was as vital as courage in this moment. Outside, shadows shifted, figures moving closer, testing the boundaries of the firelight, listening for any sign of weakness. The tension built to a nearly unbearable level, the suspense threading through every creak of the cabin, every whisper of wind, every heartbeat. She glanced at the man beside her, seeing the same determination mirrored in his eyes. They were ready to face whatever came, but the unknown always carried its own weight. The prairie seemed alive, watching, waiting, a silent witness to the battle that was about to erupt. She pressed a hand over her belly, feeling the kick that reminded her of the promise she had made. She would not give up, no matter what the night held, no matter the danger closing in from every shadow. Lightning flashed far to the east, illuminating the silhouettes moving closer to the cabin. The rain had stopped completely, leaving only the cold, wet ground beneath their feet. Every sound was amplified, the distant cry of a coyote, the snap of twigs, the whisper of wind through the grass. She held her breath, feeling the tension coiling tighter and tighter, knowing that the night would soon demand more than preparation. It would demand action, courage, and the unyielding will to protect what mattered most. The stranger's hand brushed the edge of his revolver, a subtle signal that the time was near. She felt the life inside her respond, a kick that echoed her own readiness, her own fear, her own determination. The figures outside paused, just for a moment, and in that heartbeat the world seemed to hold its breath. The night had built to a climax, every shadow, every sound, every whisper of wind conspiring to bring them to this moment. And now, standing on the edge of danger, she realized the true meaning of her promise. She would face whatever came, and the night would burn with her resolve. The moment stretched taut as a drawn bow, every heartbeat echoing in the cabin like the drumbeat of fate. The shadows outside wavered in the firelight, figures frozen for a heartbeat, weighing their next move. Then the stranger acted, moving with precise control, his voice firm yet calm. Now he whispered. In an instant, the cabin erupted into controlled chaos, made reckless but deliberate. The man beside her stepped forward, creating a barrier with his body, while she moved instinctively toward the back, shielding herself and the life she carried. The first confrontation was brief but intense. Shadows lunged, rifles raised, but the preparation they had made, the barricades, the hidden positions, the understanding of the cabin's structure, gave them a vital advantage. The stranger moved with quiet authority, disarming one of the men with swift precision. While the other's attention was drawn to a sudden noise behind the firelight, she watched, heart hammering, as every move unfolded with a mixture of strategy and instinct. And for the first time that night, she realized that fear could coexist with courage. The men outside faltered, realizing that the cabin was not an easy target. They hesitated, uncertain of the terrain, uncertain of the determination they faced. She pressed a hand to her belly, feeling the life within respond as if sensing the shift, the tide turning in their favor. The promise she had whispered so many nights ago, "I won't give him up," was no longer just words. It was a shield, a sword, and the anchor that held her steady amidst the storm of danger surrounding them. One of the men finally tried to retreat, but the stranger was faster, cutting him off with a motion that was both fluid and uncompromising. The man beside her seized the moment, moving with careful force to keep control, ensuring that no harm came to them or the cabin. The tension outside seemed to dissipate fractionally, but the adrenaline kept her senses sharp, every sound and shadow still a possible threat. She realized the night had tested more than her courage, it had tested their unity, their ability to act as one under pressure, and the depth of the promise she had made to herself and her child. The storm from earlier had left the prairie wet and glistening under the moonlight, reflecting every flicker of movement. She could see the faces of the men clearly now, their expressions a mixture of frustration and fear. They had underestimated the resolve of the woman they had targeted, and now, faced with coordinated resistance, they were forced to reconsider their intentions. The stranger moved among them with authority, his calm but firm instructions dictating every action, ensuring that the danger was neutralized without unnecessary risk. Finally, silence fell. The men had retreated, realizing that they could not prevail against the calculated defenses. The strategic advantage and the sheer determination of those inside the cabin. The fire flickered in the quiet, and the wind whispered through the open spaces, as though the prairie itself was acknowledging the end of the immediate threat. She leaned against the wall, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. The man beside her placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, his eyes softening with relief and respect. The stranger stepped back, allowing the moment to settle. "They won't be back tonight," he said, voice calm but authoritative. "They may try again, but they know now that this cabin and its occupants are not easy prey. You've made them understand that courage and determination can match force." She nodded, feeling a wave of exhaustion and relief wash over her. The storm inside her heart, the tension, the fear, the anticipation had subsided, leaving clarity and gratitude in its place. She looked at the man beside her, seeing not only the protector she had come to rely on, but a partner who had shared in the risk, the planning, and the execution. They had survived together, faced the threat as a unit, and emerged intact. The stranger had been instrumental, but the heart of their success had been the unity and resolve of those inside the cabin. She pressed her hand to her belly once more, feeling the gentle movement within. And a smile curved her lips for the first time in hours. Morning began to creep across the horizon, pale light brushing the edges of the prairie. The world outside was quiet, the danger of the night receding into memory. She moved to the window, peering out at the glistening grass and the faint traces of movement from the men who had threatened them. Their tracks faded into the distance, leaving only the certainty that the night had changed everything. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. Her promise had carried her through, shaping the outcome in ways she could not have anticipated. The man beside her approached, handing her a cup of warm tea. The gesture was simple, but it carried the weight of shared survival, of acknowledgement that they had faced something formidable and lived. She accepted it, sipping slowly, savoring the warmth and the sense of normalcy returning. The cabin, once a place of tension and fear, now felt like a sanctuary again. Though the memory of the night's events lingered, a reminder of the vigilance required in a world that was rarely forgiving. The stranger prepared to leave, his presence no longer required now that the immediate threat had passed. He paused at the door, his hat tipped slightly back, eyes reflecting a mixture of respect and understanding. "You've proven yourself tonight," he said quietly. "Not just as a survivor, but as someone who understands what it takes to protect what matters most. Keep that promise. It's the most powerful weapon you have." She nodded, feeling the weight and truth of his words. His figure disappeared into the fading night, leaving them with a newfound sense of control and readiness for the challenges ahead. The man beside her settled near the fire, his expression thoughtful. "We did what we had to do," he said, voice calm, though exhaustion was evident, "and we did it together. That's what counts." She smiled faintly, a quiet acknowledgement of the truth in his words. The night had tested more than strength. It had tested trust, partnership, and the unwavering commitment to protect life, to honor promises, and to face danger without hesitation. The prairie outside slowly brightened as the first rays of sunlight pierced the horizon. Birds began to stir, and the wind carried the scent of wet grass and distant wood smoke.
She stepped
outside briefly, feeling the cool morning air on her face, breathing in the stillness and relief that only dawn could bring. The tracks of the men who had threatened them were faint, fading into the earth, leaving only the memory of their presence and the certainty that the night's events had changed everything. She returned to the cabin, settling into a chair near the fire, her hand resting once more on her belly. The life inside her had become the anchor of her resolve, the reason for courage, and the source of unwavering determination. Every threat, every shadow, every challenge she had faced had been for this one purpose: to protect and nurture what mattered most. The lessons of the night, the vigilance, the patience, the courage were now etched into her mind, guiding her for the days ahead. The man beside her moved to her side, a quiet understanding passing between them. They had survived, yes, but more than that, they had acted with clarity, purpose, and unity. Every decision, every instinct, every calculated risk had contributed to their survival. She realized that life in these lands would always be uncertain, that threats could appear without warning, and that courage was not a one-time act, but a daily commitment. And yet she felt empowered, strengthened by the knowledge that she could face whatever came with resolve and foresight. As the sun climbed higher, illuminating the cabin and the surrounding prairie, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. The night had been a crucible, forging determination and courage in ways she could not have imagined. The promise she had made to herself and her child had carried her through, shaping her actions and guiding her instincts. She knew the days ahead would bring challenges, but the certainty of her resolve, the knowledge that she would not give up what mattered most, was a strength that no storm, no shadow, no threat could diminish. The cabin settled into quiet once more, the fire burning low, casting soft warmth and light across the room. She traced her fingers along the worn wooden surfaces, feeling the history of the place and the resilience it symbolized. Outside, the prairie stretched wide and open, a landscape both beautiful and unforgiving. She knew that life here demanded vigilance, courage, and an unyielding will. But she also knew that the promise she had made, the commitment to protect life, to face danger with determination, to honor what truly mattered, was a force stronger than any threat. The man beside her reached for her hand, offering a silent reassurance, a bond forged in the shared trials of the night. She squeezed it gently, feeling a sense of completion, of understanding, and of peace. Together, they had faced the storm, the threat, the uncertainty, and they had endured. And as the morning light filled the cabin, they knew that while challenges would come, the strength of their resolve, the power of courage, and the unwavering commitment to protect life would guide them through whatever lay ahead. She pressed a hand to her belly one final time, feeling the gentle, reassuring movement within. The life she carried had survived the night, and with it, the promise she had made. The prairie was calm now, the shadows retreating, the threat diminished. And in that quiet moment, she understood the truth that had driven her every action. Courage was not measured by the absence of fear, but by the decision to act, to protect, and to honor what truly mattered. The sun rose fully, painting the cabin and prairie with warm light. She took a deep breath, letting the weight of the night fall away, replaced by clarity, resolve, and a profound sense of hope. The promise she had made, the commitment to protect life, to face danger with courage, to honor what mattered most, was fulfilled for now. And yet it would remain her guiding principle forever. The night had tested her, shaped her, and strengthened her, leaving a story of courage, determination, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and the life she vowed to protect.